Welcome to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast. This is Gary Zaharatos. Thank you to those of you who have requested additional information about the Distinguished PE Virtual Book Study. We will have more information on that coming out shortly. It will be a meaningful way for PE teachers to reflect deeply on their craft, learn new strategies for implementing best practice, and earn hours towards license renewal all at the same time. It's a course that I'm very proud of, and I know many of you will enjoy it. If you're interested in receiving updates on when the course will start and how to enroll, please fill out the Google form linked in the show notes. My guest today is Adam Mullis. Dr. Mullis is currently in his 10th year of teaching physical education and health at the middle school level. He is a lifetime learner, having completed his master's in curricula, assessment, and instruction, and his PhD at Walden University, with his dissertation focused on policy and sex education. He has served as president of the South Carolina Association for Physical Education and Sport and vice president for the Georgia Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, along with various other state and national committees. In addition to those roles, he has facilitated dozens of sessions at local, regional, and national conferences, and is also proud to have written over $60,000 worth of grants for health and wellness. Adam specializes in shifting school culture towards health and wellness for all students, leading his schools to 3 national awards for the Healthiest Schools in America. Adam is a true advocate for health, physical education, and sport, and it was a pleasure being able to talk PE with him. In this episode, we discuss how influential PE conferences can be, how assessment legitimizes a PE program, the difference between effort and learning, breaking down daily objectives for students, using assessment data to differentiate activities, the value of student self-assessment, why a strong learning environment is fundamental to all of these things, and other topics. If you are interested in becoming a guest on the podcast and sharing your expertise with your colleagues, you can email me at gary@distinguishedpe.com. And now I bring you Adam Mullis. All right, Adam, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
So I know that assessment in PE is a topic that you are passionate about, and I'm wondering about how your views on assessment have been shaped over the years. Was there a defining moment in your career that shifted how you approach assessment in PE?
So I was really lucky going to Winthrop University. I had professors that really put in my head, hey, you're going to have to prove why there needs to be PE. And if you aren't assessing what you are teaching, how do you know that students are getting that? The PE teachers who are not assessing, are only grading on participation, aren't necessarily teaching. Because if they're just moving, then why would, what's your goal? And more professionally, or as I, moved into my first year of teaching, it's really interesting to go to a conference called the PE Institute. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but if you ever get a chance to go, it was in Asheville, North Carolina. And there were just so many people who were passionate teachers who taught like college professors described. And of course, I think there are some best practice about what you learn in college and what happens in reality. There are some differences, but there really were some people who just loved assessment and understood how to do it practically in elementary and in middle school. And it was inspiring to hear some of the people talk about, why we need quality physical education and why assessment is part of that. So that's a little bit about it. That conference was amazing. There were so many people, and I shouldn't have been there. I was so out of my league. There were so many people there that are kind of like PE rock stars that you can see on social media and things like that. But they were there to help me learn, and they were so excited that I didn't even have a job as a teacher yet, but I wanted to go to this and learn. And you don't know what you don't know going into teaching, but they were there to help me understand some of the battles that PE teachers fight and some of the difficulties of assessment in reality compared to what college was. Because obviously, at least my undergrad experience, like the PE experiences were perfect. They all had small class sizes and the teachers always did exactly what they wanted them to do. And your first year teaching, that's not exactly reality. Or at least it wasn't for me, even though I feel like I had a really strong PE program. It's just, you're new at that. So PE Institute was huge, going to sessions. And in my opinion, the game sessions, when you go to a conference, are always super packed. And of course, in PE teachers, that's so important. But sometimes the assessment ones are not so much. And in my opinion, the assessment of students and how to do that practically is just so important. How are you assessing your students? How are you making sure that students are actually learning? Because of course we want them to have fun. That's an expectation, but as professionals, are we doing what we're supposed to? So to answer your question, it's kind of been a process that, like, from the beginning, this is what I was taught. I've learned from other professionals via conferences and social media. This is how you do this, and this is how you do it well. And to continue being the best teacher I can be and making sure that students are actually learning. And the only way I can do that is to assess. And that just makes perfect sense to me.
It sounds to me like you have one of the highest regarded qualities of a young teacher, and that's just being reflective. So you were open to all of these different opportunities to grow, even before you had a PE role. Were you in college when you went to that PE institute?
No, I'll be honest, I don't even think I paid for it. I think my parents paid for it, but it was, if you ever get a chance to go to that conference, there's some people who, like, literally they hug you when you come in, which was just different. I was like, whoa, I didn't know what was going on, but it was so exciting to see that and to be a part of that and to just want to learn and to bridge that knowledge between, hey, you're an undergrad, to, hey, you're going to be a professional, and you can still be, towards what best practice I think would be considered, or what I learned in college. You can do this. And this is how you do it practically, and this is how you do it fun, even though you may have less than optimal conditions or equipment or technology, depending on what the assessment can be.
What year did you graduate college, if you don't mind me asking?
I graduated in 2015.
So you were more recently in a PE teacher prep program. What did you get your major in?
It was physical education, teacher education. My master's was curriculum assessment instruction, just because I felt like my undergrad did a great job of teaching me how to teach, but not assess. And a lot of that was focused on classroom management. And I completely understand that, because if you don't have classroom management, you can't do anything else. I really fundamentally believe that. And I think it's true, because even in order to assess students, your classroom management has to be on point. Kids have to do what you ask them to do. You have to have procedures in place. You have to have expectations in place to be able to assess and to help them learn. So my master's wasn't even a master's in necessarily PE, which I think was honestly important, because I think there's a lot of concepts that make sense in other places, but people don't want to make them make sense in physical education. For example, effort. I know that effort is important. I know it's a valuable skill. Heck, it's the reason I have a PhD. It's not because of an abundance of intelligence. It's just that I wasn't going to give up. And that's a conversation that I constantly have in middle school. But effort does not necessarily guarantee learning. I guess assessment and grade is a whole nother conversation that we could get into, because that's messy. But I tell students, hey, I worked harder than I ever worked in my life in this advanced physics class, and I got a B. And man, did I learn more than I ever did. And I gave more effort, but I still got a B. And I think that's okay, because it was based on what I learned, not how much effort I got. But both are important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Where do you think teachers get the idea that they should be assessing students on something like effort or participation or the clothes that they're wearing? Where do you think that those ideas come from?
Sometimes I think it's necessity. After 35 students, it gets very difficult to assess. You have 35 students, assessment takes 2 minutes, do the math. That's a lot of time per student and things like that. I also think it's a vague interpretation of most physical education standards, with like participating in class. But if you really dig into it, it's really talking about what's outside of class, at least in middle school in Georgia, and like getting them to participate in things on their own, which is a total different assessment than what they're doing in class. And I also think it's easy. It's simple, it's easy, and we as PE teachers are so excited and want to be cheerleaders of students, which is wonderful that maybe we feel like we're bringing kids down if they don't all get, the top mark in PE. And I can understand the conundrum of grades in physical education don't make a lot of sense to me. Assessment does. So I understand assessing where students are, but what does a 78 mean in PE? And those are hard philosophical questions that I don't have a perfect answer to.
Tell me if you think I'm on the right track. Oftentimes, I will make the connection with teachers that wearing the correct sneakers to PE class is the same as bringing a pencil and your textbook to math class. We obviously don't expect a math teacher to grade or assess on those things. So I wonder why PE teachers think that they should assess on them as well. Do you think that that's a fair comparison to draw, or is there something I'm missing?
I think it's a great comparison indeed because it is an expectation. Like everyone is going to participate in my class when they walk through the door. Obviously, classroom management, building relationships, 99.9% of students respond. And then, that other percentage, you got to get creative and do some other support sometimes. But there's a difference between what we want students to learn and expectations. So in my class, it is an expectation that everyone will participate. In order to get them to learn what you want them to learn, you've got to set, as a teacher, really specific goals and objectives, and then figure out ways to break that down so that every student can learn. And me personally, I really do feel like all students can reach what I'm trying to get them to learn. And if not, I either need to change the goal or it's my fault. And there are, of course, in middle school, I'm going to be realistic. There are some students who do not try. And yes, sometimes not participating and not being able to do the skill looks similar. So I think it's a close battle there. But for example, let's look at invasion games. So if kids are playing a game of basketball, that doesn't mean they are moving to open space, which is something that I would assess them on because moving to open space is an applicable skill in a lot of invasion games. So that's one of the reasons I do, because I want them to be able to play soccer. I want them to be able to play basketball and other invasion games. So if a student is not participating, they're not moving to open space, but just because they're participating doesn't mean they're moving to open space. And I want both because that means I'm actually doing my job as a physical education teacher. And of course, that takes coaching and it says, hey, if you're not making the top mark, I don't think you're a bad person. I'm not perfect either. And there's a lot of learning and growth that goes along that. And kids are sometimes very surprised that, their assessment scores aren't 100 or aren't the top mark, depending on how you're looking at it. But once they understand my rhythm, they actually try, I think, more to try to reach what I would consider, a top mark of an assessment, like moving to open space, for example.
You mentioned earlier that assessment can also prove why PE is important. And I feel like effective assessment practices can legitimize physical education and distance it from other activity programs or from recess, et cetera. So I think that that's one really important reason why PE teachers should assess students on their progress towards standards-based learning and not outdated practices like wearing the proper shoes or just simple participation. I want to get into what you just mentioned about goals and objectives. Do you have any specific ways that you communicate your goals to students at the beginning of the lesson or throughout the lesson so that there's transparency there and that all students know exactly either what they're going to be assessed on for that day or what they should be making progress on for that day?
So tried a lot of different ways and a lot of different things. I'll probably start with the simplest. When I first started teaching, really breaking down the standards. For example, most PE standards, I know in Georgia, they talk about something with offense and defense since we're on the invasion game theme. And I think as a PE teacher, or a lot of PE teachers overestimate the amount of knowledge kids have about what is offense and what is defense. And yes, some kids do know a lot about that, but some kids have never, ever played any kind of invasion game. So in order to first reach that standard, I have to do my job and I have to break that thing down like someone has never heard about that. So if I want them to play in an invasion game, they have to understand offense and defense. They have to understand the difference between tactics and skills. I have to understand the strategies, even though, I didn't play basketball growing up. So I have to understand a little bit of that and make sure that I can set up then lessons to meet those criteria. And that was a lot of work, particularly when I first started. It took me hours and hours and hours, but I realized and honestly now AI could do it a lot quicker. A little bit jealous of that. But now I realized that made me really dig in to what I wanted them to learn. So it doesn't just look like, hey, go participate. Hey, I'm looking for you to play person to person or zone defense. Here's the difference and here how that can look. And there's pros and cons to each. So it gave me so much more to teach than just, hey, here's the ball. Because kids, even some of our students who are very good at a particular game, aren't necessarily physically literate. But to go into your question of how about that assessment, one of the things I do is I put up different levels of what I've considered from, beginning to advance, a lot of different ways you can verbiage that. And we talk about each level, and then I have kids grade me. I play a kid in front of the class, which, if you get that super excited kid, it doesn't take very long. This may be later in a lesson, but I'm like, hey, what level do you think I was and why? Hey, you didn't move to open space. You weren't playing person to person defense on anyone, and they can start to assess me. I have, of course, video kids and having other students video each other with donated iPhones, which a lot of people don't think about. Your district probably has phones for their district officials that they update, so you can get iPhones for free, which I play a lot of disc golf and I assess myself throwing into a tree all the time. I liked one of my favorite. Were you ever familiar with Plagnets?
Yeah, clickers, similar to clickers.
So clickers. So what kids would do is I'd give them like a task, and task 1 was what I would consider easy, and task 4 was more difficult to whatever the learning objective would be. It could be as simple as like if we're doing something with badminton, the first one is 5 underhand serves to a target, and if they can complete that, then they can move to a more difficult task. Not necessarily grading them on these tasks, especially when it's like, I'm not grading you if you're doing something 4 out of 5 times, but if they move their magnet from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4, it gave me a better idea, honestly, especially when I was new, because I would rush through lessons. I wouldn't give enough time for kids to actually, learn or practice, or what I thought and what they thought were way different. So it was a really cool way for them to kind of assess themselves with just fitness skills, push-ups, curl-ups, squats, even some light dumbbell work, having students and teaching students, hey, this is how we talk to people. You're doing a great job, but keep your chest up when you're doing curls, whatever, make sure you're going down to 90 degrees on the squat or whatever it is, and having that mindset of that. So nothing groundbreaking there, I would say, but things that have worked in my class to help them. This year, I've tried something new. I think in PE, it's really hard to make assessment visual, and it frustrates me because I feel like I make my learning criteria super clear. Like it's on the board, like I hand you a rubric, like everything like that. And they're like, why did I get this on this? And so for me, I've started I kind of think of it as like a PE passport, and I didn't make up this idea. Everything I'm talking about, I've stolen from somebody. If you get this skill, then you get some kind of sticker. So you understand that all right, so now I can do, 5 push-ups with correct form or whatever the criteria it is that you want to. And then, hey, okay, you get a sticker because you can meet that criteria. And honestly, kids love stickers, even in middle school. So that's kind of, that motivation for them to try to learn new things. And they understand, hey, yes, we're having fun. We're playing games, but I do want you to learn some things, and learning looks different, but it's still learning.
I want to go back to something that you said earlier, this theme of transparency. So you clearly articulate what the goals are for each lesson so that students are aware of what they're supposed to be making progress towards each day. And then they know what to go out and demonstrate physically. Here in Denver, we have a pretty unique expectation that students also have to use language to articulate their learning in every single class. It's actually a federal consent decree that we're under that says for the past several decades, actually 40 or 50 years, that Denver has not been serving its English language learners to the extent that they should be. So every content area, whether it's PE or art or math, has to provide students with opportunities to verbally articulate their learning. whether that means they're going to justify their reasoning or compare and contrast today's skill versus yesterday's or describe the cues to a particular skill. I'm just curious how people do it in other states. In Georgia, is there any expectation that students can articulate their learning as well? Or when you assess it, are you simply looking for their physical ability to demonstrate it?
I think another conundrum with PE is that we focus on the physical part of physical education when I can make an argument that the affective domain is probably the most important in middle school because of the development, because of recent events and things like that. At my school, we've gone from a 90-minute class to a 45-minute class. So still kind of adjusting there. But I mean, when we were in a 90-minute class, every day we'd have some kind of fitness log. And of course, I'd be asking, how are you getting exercise outside of school? But it'd also be simple questions like, how do you feel like you did on this assessment and why? What do you think your grade should be? Or what do you think your marks should be? What did you do well? What could you do better? So that's an easy way. It goes to a spreadsheet and an easy way for students. There is a push for kind of like cross-curricular stuff in Georgia where, writing and reading should be in every subject. And I don't disagree with that. The issue I'm running in now is it's more like a once a week thing just because those 45-minute classes are so brief. But the point is, I want to make sure that all kids can shine in some aspect. And some kids really do love the written part. That's how they feel, in quotes, smart. And some kids are just wonderful at working together and following the rules. And some kids, the star athletes love that part of PE. And I think all parts of that need to be assessed. I think that's the magic of PE. We get to see all of those different sides of students because all of these things are important, not only in PE, but in life. As I tell my students, like I play disc golf and I see a grown man punch his disc golf bag, and that's ridiculous because if we were that good, we wouldn't be playing on a Tuesday night for $3.
Yeah,
So,
I play adult league rec hockey, ice hockey. So you should see some of the behaviors that happen out there on the ice.
I could only imagine.
You talked a bit about differentiating assessments, which I think is really valuable. So students can demonstrate things, they can articulate their learning, they can self-reflect on what they're learning in PE that day. All of those opportunities for students to be able to reflect on their learning, I think just really benefit the student experience. Let's talk a little bit about some practical ways to assess students. Can you describe some assessment strategies that you use, whether they're traditional or non-traditional, some things that you've used successfully in PE? What does it look like to capture data for 35 or so students in a middle school PE class?
Well, I tell you what, it can be messy. But in the messy is the fact that, you try something else. The simplest thing is simply creating your rubric assessment and figuring out, for me, we're required to do formative and summative grades. And I'm not sure, I've heard lots of different speak on that. But in short, if they have the basic skills, and we'll go back to invasion game of moving to open space, I'm trying to plan the unit where it gives them the best place to be successful. So, for example, my sixth graders may not go to full court because then that adds a layer of complexity of trying to transition defense, which, believe it or not, will absolutely blow students' minds. Since COVID, the age has definitely not been skill dependent. Like it's been more mixed up than ever. Anyway, when am I assessing? I'm assessing always from the beginning to the end, and it really depends on what I want them to learn. So looking at the standards, figuring out what is the most important things I want them to learn that are, to me, they can be transferred to other activities. So that's why, for example, we moved to open space or net wall games, things like athletic stance or how to serve, or like the underhand serve. There's like 5 different things in sports that can be used that are similar to that motion and shifting weight and things like that. So once I figure that out, I try to give the students as many opportunities as possible to demonstrate that skill. So for example, I try to give students a chance to do that as easily as possible. If one kid needs a giant racket to demonstrate strategies in badminton, then that's okay with me. Once again, I want them to make the best grade possible. I want them to know all that. So I'm assessing constantly, and students who get it, they may go to a game quicker than the students who not. So I think my first year or two of teaching, I had a hard time, like almost going off the lesson plan. But sometimes you're going to have students who know what you want them to know, and I think it's okay to let them play and let them be active. It doesn't mean you don't challenge them, but they may not need as much practice as other students, and figuring out a way to split the gym in half or whatever that is. And once again, as students are playing, my mind is on invasion games now. As they are playing, doing things like we've talked about, like the passport, and be like, hey, you're doing a great job moving to open space, put a sticker on your passport. And the passport may look like a giant list with their names on it, or a sheet I give them at the beginning of class with a folder. You could do this digitally as well. I love technology, but sometimes it can be very distracting based on your age group. So for me in middle school, whenever there's technology out, there's playing games. There's always that fight. So figuring out what works best. I wouldn't consider myself old school in any sense of the word, but I do see the value of pencil and paper assessment. I also see the value of assessment to keep kids engaged. So if I have 40 kids in a gym, I can't safely let all of them play badminton in the time I have. So if I allow 2 kids to assess where are the shots going and are the students actually using different shots, then that's a way to keep students on task and learning, even though they can't be physically moving safely. So that's a practical assessment.
That's such a great strategy for larger class sizes. One of the things that I advocate for, and I know many PE teachers do, is to have minimal wait time in the gym. But sometimes when you have large class sizes, there's going to have to be points during certain lessons where students are going to be standing on the side. And I think one thing that we can do with that time is to have students engage in cognitively rigorous tasks. One of them, like you just mentioned, could be providing their classmates with some feedback. The other thing that I want to take away from what you just said too was how you use these assessments. So you are constantly assessing students, and then you're using that information to differentiate their experiences in PE. So some students who might align to like the advanced level on your rubric, for example, will then get to go play in a badminton game. And then you can modify your activities for students who are still either in that beginner or middle range based on your assessment. So the reason that you're assessing is to match activities to students' skill and ability levels.
Right. So once again, especially in the recent years, if I feel like if I don't get students successful in the first 5 tries of something, they're going to hate it. I'm not saying that's wrong, not saying that's right, but that's just an observation that I have seen increase. So I got to get students as successful as possible. And that's one of those things that I think ties with making sure all students' needs are met. And assessment is that I got to figure out, okay, where are my students at? And sometimes that is questions. Hey, who's played volleyball before? Or who plays club volleyball? And maybe that's the first way we split them into 2 groups. And then we can, design different learning tasks. But at the same time, that takes a lot of experience to be able to have 6 lessons in your pocket to be able to challenge those kids who are advanced and challenge those kids who have never touched a volleyball before. So if you're on the newer scale of things, these things take time. I think best practice is definitely a scale, not a destination. So
I think it's important for teachers to hear that folks like you don't just come out of the gate with implementing all of these different practices, right? It takes a lot of trial and error. And then they're not just things that you can do right when you get out of college in your first year of teaching, but you have to be willing to try to implement new practices, right? So what would you recommend maybe the first step for a teacher who's looking to up their game in assessment? They want to get away from assessing on wearing the right sneakers or just simply participating in class. What do you think might be a good piece of advice for someone ready to take that next step?
Social media is probably the simplest and easiest tool. Asking someone on social media who is a PE rock star, hey, can I pick your brain for 30 minutes? Even as a person who loves technology and values social media, I can't understate the importance of going to your state conferences. And if you're lucky enough, the national conferences, there's a lot of barriers to that. But going and talking to people who fight the same fights of PE problems, I like to call them, and that includes assessment, and who have been doing it 3 times as long as you have and still super, super passionate and still love it. I think that is the most valuable tool. I was lucky enough, Shape had like a mentor match, and I just haphazardly filled something out, ended up connecting with somebody who's definitely a master teacher, health teacher of the year. He taught PE as well. So just really helpful. Definitely go to a state conference. And reading. I mean, I'm a nerd, no doubt about it. I have an Amazon wish list right now of 3 textbooks just because I want to stay up to date on best practice and what is current. And I want to be able to talk the talk because, yes, I'm a PE teacher, but when an administrator comes into my room, I want them there. And I want to explain, like, hey, this is what you're looking for, and this is what it looks like. I realize it looks like chaos to you, but like, yes, the net's lower over here. And actually, we did assess earlier in the unit. No, I don't have my rubric out right now, but here it is. And if you ask, kid A what I expect them to learn, they know exactly what it is. So assessment, it's important to always get better and be able to assess kids so you can advocate for what you're doing, which requires you to know what standard you're trying to teach. So I think it's a cycle there.
So we've touched a little bit on student-led assessment and self-evaluation in PE. What are some ways that you implement self-assessment, and how does that impact student learning?
I think teaching students how to assess each other, one, I think it's really important for them to be able to assess themselves, because that's me personally as a person who, like, I used to teach myself how to do, when I was growing up, how to break dance in 8th grade. And that's something that I enjoyed, which sounds super cheesy, but hey, I can still do a windmill. So, but my point is, if students are going to be physically literate, then I think they have to have some evaluation of, hey, I don't look like a professional. What can I do with my body to teach to be more like someone who is highly skilled? And with social media and YouTube and everything else, they have all the access to all the videos of so many people. So point is, it can be a game changer for students to teach each other, because middle schoolers, what I've noticed at least, middle schoolers don't like listening to me, but when they listen to each other, it's just more powerful sometimes. And honestly, I don't think like a middle schooler anymore. So if I can teach a middle schooler and they can teach each other, that can be way more powerful. It's like another coach. Now, obviously, they're not trained physical education teachers. There's a limit of what they can do. But teaching that mindset, and hey, we're here to help each other. Of course, you really, especially if it's a brand new skill, you really got to lay it out. And like, as I've gotten more experience, it's almost like I leave them literally word for word what to say. It's like, hey, you're doing a good job, but you could go a little bit lower in your push-up, or insert whatever it is. I've also found, and this is definitely very informal assessment, but if you find ways to change the game. So for example, if we're playing badminton and you want kids in the athletic stance, then one of the ways you can score a point is say, hey, politely, hey, you need to be in athletic stance. And that's a way to help kids learn that they're not in it. And of course, that helps them play the game. And that can be a tricky line with middle school because they can take it too far. But with those expectations and things like that, it can be a good way to do it.
That's a really great way to modify games and activities so that they align directly to your daily objective. The other thing with self-assessment and students being able to provide feedback to their peers is that it's a real world skill that they're going to need for the rest of their lives. The ability to receive feedback, of course, and the ability to provide feedback to others in a respectful and socially appropriate way is something that students will need in no matter what they do with the rest of their lives.
Right. And it's how to communicate, how to speak to people, how to accept feedback without being rude or disrespectful and things like that. I mean, that's right. That's a skill they're going to need everywhere. And as I tell students, yeah, sometimes, you may feel a little bit uncomfortable, but the same is true when you go for your first job interview or things that many people experience. And you're not always going to be the best when you first start things, as I can tell you so many stories about, especially in my first year of teaching, which I should probably write an apology letter to some of those students. But you're absolutely right. So many things in PE can teach them lifelong skills that they need, like accepting feedback. And what I try to tell students is, like, if you can teach yourself what you're doing wrong in a physical skill, then you can take that mindset and understanding with other skills. I don't know about you, but man, I learned a lot of math in college online because I understood how to like take that feedback of like, I'm not getting this. And one of the most important things I think that students can learn is how to take feedback and actually do something with it. And that's a tough skill that PE really helps with. And that can be transferred to whatever they want to do.
One of the things that's inspiring in these conversations that I have with my guests is that they're not afraid to talk about their growth throughout years of their career. I was always, I don't know if it was embarrassed or just a little hesitant to talk about my first year or two of teaching. I don't think it was by any means any worse than anybody else's, but I don't know. It's just inspiring to hear people say, like, yeah, when I first started, the things that I'm talking about today are not what I was doing. It took me a long time to get here. And I guess what it boils down to is allowing teachers to have a grace period, to say that they don't have to do all these things that you're talking about in their first or second year of teaching. It's a lot of experimenting and trying to find out what works best for them.
I definitely agree. When I think about my first year of teaching, I wish I could like draw this, but literally when I was trying to take attendance my first day, the kids were just running around me. I knew PE, but I didn't understand middle school. Figuring out learning the community, and each community is different. So even if you know one middle school, that doesn't mean you know the slang and verbiage and culture of a new school. So giving yourself grace that learning PE classroom management, and this is very biased, but in my opinion, is much more difficult than the health class. Now, engagement, we could go an argument in that. And so health class feels like a vacation as far as like management. So it is a very difficult skill. And if you watch people in like a physical activity setting, it's not something that just comes naturally. It is a very difficult skill that has to be developed and refined. But in short, yes, absolutely. It is always a process. Somebody told me I would master middle school, and 10 years in, like, and I see kids and I know that like I have some skill because I see kids who are just crazy everywhere else. But as soon as they get a classroom, they say, "Hey, Dr. Mullis," like they respect me enough to do what I ask. And I know that's a skill, but it's just the age, they have a lot going on, and there's a lot going on in the world and everything else. So yeah, it is a step-by-step process that never ends. And that's what I enjoy so much about middle school, because you never get to the peak.
So you mentioned that one of the main challenges with assessment, but among other things, one of the main challenges is having excellent classroom management. Are there any other challenges that you see when it comes to effective assessment practices with students?
Classroom management is definitely my number one, as we've talked about, just because not only do you know how to teach PE, but then the tricky parts of assessment, like with iPads or with how are they going to get their laptop and still move 50% of the lesson or more. And is the Wi-Fi broken that day? Things that happen in reality. I'd say my next is probably figuring out, okay, you got your classroom management down, you know your procedures and what makes sense in your program, then what is the most important things you're really trying to get them to teach? Because I know, first thing I would make is rubrics, and the rubrics were like way too hard. And I wasn't getting a 4 on the rubric, and then, changing and changing and changing till finally I'm at a place now where I have the rubric for the kids, but I know what I'm looking for and what each stage is without looking at it. And that takes time. And time is something that no teacher has enough of. So the conundrum of we have all these expectations as teachers, but we don't have enough time to do them can be very challenging. And then also finding realistic ways to assess students. And the truth of the matter is, now I can pick out much faster, the students who are really struggling and the students are not, and what to do in that situation and how to record that. But that takes time, and that's very difficult. I've been in situations where I only have kids for 9 weeks, and to me, it feels like I'm doing procedures, and then they're gone. And that's very difficult.
I know that we're talking mostly about assessment today and instructional methods, but you've brought up learning environment several times, and I'll never pass up an opportunity to try to get some advice on what a safe and orderly learning environment looks like and how a teacher can achieve that. Do you have any tips or advice that you would want to share with teachers on how to achieve the learning environment that you've described?
So I don't have to do this now because I'm 10 years in, But my first year of teaching, and I did this in undergrad, but of course, each situation is different based on, are you using locker rooms? Is your locker room in your gym on the same floor? Like there's so many procedures, but literally writing it out step by step as exactly what you want them to do and what that looks like. And be prepared to let kids practice and practice and practice. And I have been observed and students aren't following my procedure. And obviously, I'm usually more observed more than once, but sometimes kids got to practice, and I'm okay with that because in my mind, if we can't follow my procedures, then we can't do anything else. Safety is number one. I have to return you mentally and physically as you were given to me, and I take that responsibility very seriously. I also think it gets easier as you know moms, dads, uncles, aunts, as you're in a system for a while. So taking the time to learn the community, and I call more parents now than I ever have. And at first I thought my teaching's so good that kids won't get in trouble, which, lesson planning and having ways to meet different skill levels does take care of some of your discipline problems. But sometimes, I mean, there's no shame in reaching out to parents, and it's something we should do not only for negative, but for positive. And honestly, I'm speaking to myself in my first year of teaching, no one else there, but reaching out to parents and say, hey, your student is awesome. I'm so glad to have them can be so powerful when you get their, little brother who's way different.
You said several things there that I really connect with. A couple of them were planning for the environment. Every teacher knows what it's like to plan their lessons, to plan their activities, to plan the objectives that they're going to align to a standard and how they're going to communicate those objectives to students. Planning for an environment, though, I think is overlooked. I wonder if that is taught in universities these days. Maybe you were in university 10 years ago, so you have a more current experience with that. Being able to plan for your environment allows a teacher to then reflect on what's happening in the gym, to be able to pause that lesson and ask themselves, is this what I planned for? Is the behavior that I'm observing right now what I expect out of my students? And then to be able to go into some sort of reset plan, right? Or intervention based on that. But if a teacher doesn't actually spend time planning for how they want students to enter the gym, or how they want students to transition to picking out equipment, or what they want it to look like when they're in activity time, they don't have anything to base that off of. So that was the first part. The second thing is just about practice, and I really connected with how you said it doesn't matter if you're getting observed or evaluated. You know what you need to do in order to give your students the opportunity to exhibit on-task behaviors. So providing them with opportunities to practice things like I just mentioned, entering the gym or getting equipment, the only way that they're going to improve on those skills is the same way that they would improve on a physical skill, like an underhand serve in badminton, is getting reps at it. I know that was one of my biggest faults, I think, in my first year of teaching was I'm teaching middle school students. I can just communicate what my expectation is to them, and I expect them to be able to do it. And I see you shaking your head. What a rookie mistake that was of me, right? You have to communicate it. You have to model it. You have to give students opportunities to practice it. And then you need to do all of those things over and over and over again. Last thing that I'll say is that I really do appreciate you saying that, like, it doesn't matter who is in your gym, whether you're in there with your students by yourself or you have a building coach or a principal, you have to clearly communicate your expectations and make sure that students are following those expectations. There's never a bad time to pause a lesson and have students practice one of your expectations. I see it happen. I see two different things. In the lessons that I evaluate for some teachers, sometimes a teacher will say, well, I'm being evaluated, so I need to ignore some of these behaviors and just keep the lesson going so that I could teach my content for the day. I think we both know how those lessons end up when students are not being held accountable for their behavior. But then there's other teachers who say, you know what, it doesn't matter who's here. It's time for a class reset. I'm going to bring students back to their home base spots, or I'm going to bring them back out into the hallway, and we're going to reset this class, restate the expectations, and start things over. And I've always advocated with the teachers that I work with that is the absolute correct approach.
Once again, I feel like I had a hard reset with behavior, discipline, how I view things about that issue since COVID, because things changed. I think everybody can agree there. And I'm not trying to blame COVID, but things are different, at least in my experience. We don't go over every rule, but the major ones that I see over and over again, we go over every day. And I see kids every day. And sometimes it's quick. Hey, you're doing a great job keeping your hands to yourself. Please follow directions quickly. And then when I ask you to do something, do it the first time. Thank y'all so much. Let's get started today. I don't know. Kids respond better to that rather than doing it the opposite way. And I'd rather them hear it too much than too little. But I have to remember, if I don't teach them something, how would they know how to do it? I can't assume kids grew up with the same background, work ethic, experiences that I did. So if I don't teach them it, I can't expect. And that's why I was shaking my head, because now I think about that. Like today, I think it's polite. Part of being respectful to me is you say hello to me. I might be your favorite teacher, I might not, but we can all say hello to each other and communicate. So we literally practiced it the first day. Hey doc, how you doing? Good to see you. And I give them a list of things they can say, as long as you're making eye contact with me, because that's another thing, middle schoolers. And of course, there's always a little bit of variation based on student need and things like that. But I don't look like my students. So we have to learn that, we're both humans, even though we may have different experiences, we may talk different, and we got to learn to communicate with each other, even if PE is your favorite place or not favorite place. We got to teach everything. And that includes PE, that includes assessment, and that includes how to interact with each other, because not every student has all of these experiences.
I think it's great to hear how intentional you are in setting up a safe and welcoming culture in your gym. Just something as simple as greeting students at the door and having them respond back to you. Like, that's the level of intentionality that teachers need to have with students in order to create that space where all students are going to feel safe and welcome and be willing to take risks, whether it's academic risks or physical risks as well. So I think it was really important to hear you detail that. Adam, is there anything else that you would like to leave with the teachers that are listening? Any last pieces of advice on either assessment or learning environment strategies?
In general, the person who's probably listened to this podcast is a rock star. They're thinking about assessment. They want to get better, and that's why they're here. And I'm so honored that you would spend any of your time, your free time, listening to this. As a profession, I think we have to realize that sometimes when we get talking with other people who are just as passionate as us, we assume everybody is. And the hard part, especially for our, I'd say even sometimes elementary and middle and high school, is we get into a situation where not everybody philosophically believes what I believe, and doing your best as an educator, trying to help them as easy as possible, learning the things we're talking about. Because at some point, if PE teachers aren't doing their jobs, then why do we need to be here? And of course, PE teachers are put in very difficult situations with 900 kids in their classroom. That's a PE problem in general. But we've got to advocate for what we're doing. My last note is a little bit off assessment, but once you have your program and you have your expectations and you know that students are learning, how can you impact health and wellness in other ways? If a kid is being super physically active, but the only choices that they have to eat in other places, it's really hard to improve their fitness if they're not getting the nutrients they need. So I hope that not only you're a champion for your program, but you're also a champion for your school with health and wellness, because kids need it. And it may not be the most popular thing that say, hey, we don't need donut parties every day. And not that I don't love a good donut, but as an adult, I have a full functioning brain that can tell me, hey, you don't need a donut every day necessarily. And kids don't always have that person. So being a champion for kids' overall health and wellness, I think PE teachers are in a really powerful position to advocate for the really important things. Math and reading skills are so dang important, but what does it matter if you don't have your health and wellness? And of course, physical activity, physical education are all parts of that.
Beautifully said, Adam. I appreciate your time today, and I trust that you'll send me some links of you breakdancing to add to the show notes.
I don't think those will exist. My wife probably wouldn't want those on the internet, but okay. I mean, you see me at a wedding, watch out.
It was worth a shot. Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it.
Thank you.